So I'd like to ask that all our participants stay muted during the presentations, and then we will have time for questions after each presentation. So you're encouraged to raise your hand, turn on your video if you wish, and unmute yourself to ask the questions after the presentation, or if you prefer, feel free to type any questions into the chat function, and I will read them out for the presenters to respond to. So today's session, hosted by the Canadian Marine Shipping Risk Forum, the Salish Sea Transboundary Working Group is intended to be a place to share work that's completed and underway, as well as ideas, concerns, questions, and issues about marine shipping risk in the Salish Sea region. All of those who have an interest in these topics are very welcome to join the discussion and contribute their perspective. So our agenda for today, we're going to start with welcome and introductions, and then move on to an analysis of maritime incidents and accidents in the Salish Sea, and that is going to be presented by Tessa Coulthart of Clear Seas. Then our next presentation is creating a new risk assessment methodology by Transport Canada and Adrian Nicol presenting that. And then final presentation for the day, a new risk model that the Washington Department of Ecology has presenting us. And then we'll wrap up and have a brief discussion about some next steps for the Salish Sea Working Group. So before I introduce our first speaker, I'd like to just do a quick poll so you get a sense of all the different perspectives here today. So I am going to attempt to, oh, I have apparently logged in from another device, which I don't think I intended to do, but I think that means that somebody from my team has logged in using the Clear Seas Zoom account. So apparently I can't do polls. What we might do instead is maybe if you would like to put your name and your affiliation into the chat, then everybody can see who's here and what perspective you're representing, if that's something you're able to do. So for example, I would be Megan Matheson, Clear Seas NGO, and Ron Pelot would be Dalhousie University. Oh, and it looks like that isn't going to work either because some people only have access to message the hosts. All right, so that plan isn't working out either. So we'll just leave that idea and move on to, I'm going to try and fix that while we do presentations and see if I can sort out this polling thing, and we'll do another poll later. So we're going to go ahead and move into the presentation side of things. And our first presentation today is an analysis of shipping risk in the Salish Sea, conducted by Clear Seas to help support public and expert discussion about how shipping risk is considered, presented, and discussed. This has been a topic of interest to Clear Seas since the very first research study that we commissioned, and this was from the Council of Canadian Academies in 2015, entitled Commercial Marine Shipping Accidents, Understanding the Risks in Canada. And the work that we've done most recently is going to be presented by Tessa Coulthart, one of Clear Seas' dedicated research associates. Tessa is experienced in data collection and analysis, using GIS to visually display and explain results. Tessa completed a Bachelor of Science in Geography and Environmental Studies at the University of Victoria. And Tessa, I will hand it over to you to get us going.
Thanks so much. Perfect. Hi, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. My name is Tessa Coulthart, as Megan said, and I'm a research associate at Clear Seas. So last year, I helped develop Clear Seas Marine Incidents and Accidents Dashboard, which you might be familiar with. In this presentation, I'll talk a bit about how we developed the spatial data set of marine incidents and accidents for that project, and how we're applying the data to get a better sense of shipping risk in different areas, including the Salish Sea. So Clear Seas, as Megan said, has been interested in shipping risk since its creation. And one of the first things we commissioned was to look at the nature of the risks of marine shipping. Both the Marine Incidents and Accidents Dashboard and the analyses we've done to find occurrence rates, which I'll be talking about today, aim to build on that report. We're hoping this work will inform public dialogue and help frame the conversation around shipping risk. So Clear Seas initiated the Maritime Commercial Incidents and Accidents Study to explore the risks related to marine shipping in Canada, in particular marine occurrences. We know that to understand the current risks of shipping today, we can first look at the marine occurrences that have happened in the past. So visualizing the marine occurrence data with a map and dashboard keeps it interactive and helps maintain that really important spatial component in understanding shipping risk. Since the Marine Incidents and Accidents Dashboard was launched last summer, we've had over 1,500 visits to the application, which is great to see. We're planning to continue to maintain and update the data, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. So in this presentation, I won't be taking you on a tour through the dashboard, but you can find it on our website with the report if you're interested. So there's a lot to cover in how we created the dashboard data set of incidents and accidents. I'm going to try to go through it pretty quickly, but I recommend checking out the project report on our website if anything's unclear. So the study area for this data set of marine incidents and accidents includes all waters in Canada's exclusive economic zones, as well as several other areas. We chose to include the coastal waters of adjacent states, such as Washington, Maine, and southeastern Alaska, to gather a more accurate picture of marine incidents and accidents that have occurred in those transboundary regions. Data were gathered over a 10-year time period from January 2009 to December 2018. And because Clear Seas is focused on researching commercial marine shipping, only commercial marine shipping vessels and some passenger vessels were included in the study. For this project, all of the data were gathered from publicly available government sources where location information for each marine occurrence was available. We downloaded data extracts from the Transportation Safety Board of Canada's MARSIS database and the US Coast Guard's missile database. So the most challenging part of this project for me was trying to align the data from the different sources to create one complete data set. The Transportation Safety Board of Canada and the US Coast Guard don't define or record marine occurrences in the same way. Different terminology is used and different types of information are gathered for each marine occurrence. So Clear Seas developed classification strategies for marine occurrence types and vessel types to help integrate this data together. So for this project, we use the term marine occurrence to refer to any marine incident, accident, event, or casualty that has been recorded by the Transportation Safety Board of Canada or the US Coast Guard. Marine incident refers to any marine occurrence that is not an accident or serious accident. Incidents are perceived to be less severe than accidents. Marine accidents refers to any marine occurrence that presents a more serious risk of damage to the ship or the environment. The occurrence types classified as accidents by Clear Seas are also classified as accidents by the Transportation Safety Board of Canada, which supports this classification strategy. And you can see which types of occurrences we've defined as incidents or accidents in this column here in that second row, or in that second column. Serious marine accidents refer to a marine accident with serious impacts, particularly in terms of damage to the ship, damage to the environment, or other types of damage. So the criteria we use to identify serious marine accidents are any marine occurrence that resulted in a TSBC or NTSB investigation, a marine casualty identified as a serious marine accident in the US Coast Guard missile database. There's actually a field in their database for serious accidents, or a marine occurrence with an IMO classification of serious incident or very serious incident according to the missile reports, or an IMO class level of very serious marine casualty according to the MARSIS database. Finally, some manual checking and cleaning of the data was also done to improve the quality of the data set that we created. So last year, during the launch of the Marine Incidents and Accidents Dashboard, we presented results from an analysis we did to find rates of incidents and accidents in the Salish Sea. We used the dashboard data set of incidents and accidents and some vessel traffic information for the Salish Sea that we had from another project that Clear Seas did, our vessel traffic analysis. So we did this to add context to the number of incidents and accidents happening in that region. So using our AIS data that we had, we found the average number of visits to the region per vessel per year. So we worked to find out how frequently incidents and accidents occurred based on the number of vessel visits. We calculated the average number of vessels involved in occurrences per year for each vessel type, and then divided that by the average number of vessel visits by vessel type. So as you can see, this showed us that bulk carriers had the highest rate of incidents, but one of the lower rates of accidents for the region, with vehicle carriers and cruise ships having some of our lowest occurrence rates, as you can see. Our AIS data only covered 2014 to 2016. So the average number of round trip transits per year comes from those years. To find the average number of incidents and accidents per year, we used a larger time frame. We used incidents and accidents from 2014 to 2018, just to get a better sample size of data. So after this analysis, we saw that there was an opportunity to improve with maybe a different vessel traffic metric and some more data. So this brings us to the project we're currently working on, which is assessing shipping risks to regions in Canada. We wanted to expand this type of analysis across Canada with more AIS data, and also update last year's analysis in the Salish Sea region. So this analysis will provide greater clarity into the risks of shipping in different regions for different vessel types. We're looking to find the rate of marine occurrences by dividing the number of incidents, accidents, and serious accidents by the number of nautical miles sailed by a given vessel in a given region. So we received summarized AIS data in spatial grid format from Transport Canada for this analysis. And you can see that the grid on this map, which we used in combination with our marine incidents and accidents spatial data set to define our study area, which you can see in that kind of transparent orange color. So while we are planning to look at a few different regions across Canada for this project, we also wanted to take another look at the Salish Sea subregion, which is what I'll get into now. So our study area includes all of the summarized vessel traffic grid cells in the Salish Sea, and you can see those highlighted in yellow here. And we're using vessel traffic data from 2015 to 2018. The traffic data is arranged so that we know the number of nautical miles sailed in this region for each vessel type. And then we're looking at the vessels involved in marine occurrences in 2015 to 2018 as well, in the same grid cells, and dividing those results by the number of nautical miles sailed. Like we did with our marine occurrence data sources, we also had to align the vessel types of the marine incidents and accidents data set with the vessel types from the summarized vessel traffic data. So here you can see the vessel types and subtypes that we've grouped into these different buckets on the left for this analysis. So when we say bulk carrier or ferry, this is what we think those vessels are called in all of these different data sources. So we've kind of made it a little bit easier for you to see the groups of the different data sources. So in yellow here, that left column in that yellow box is the US Coast Guard's vessel category, and then next to it is the subcategory for that same data source. So we had already created this great cleaned incidents and accidents data set, but we had to filter and align the summarized vessel traffic data to make sure we were only including traffic information for vessels that were included in our incidents and accidents data set. We did a lot of manual checking and cleaning of the data to try to make sure it was as accurate as possible. So this is more of an ideal relationship between reported vessel types rather than what the relationship might actually look like, because we did have to make some edits. So there are some clear limitations to this analysis, specifically regarding data quality and our methodology of reclassifying the data from the different data sources. The marine incidents and accidents data set we used for this analysis comes with its own limitations. The information reported from each marine occurrence isn't always verified. And we've noticed that the locations and vessel attributes of the data is sometimes incorrect. So for example, this photo is a screenshot from the dashboard that shows a ferry involved in a marine occurrence that is incorrectly located on a highway in Quebec instead of in the water, as it should be. Also, the way we classified vessels and marine occurrences into those standardized buckets isn't perfect. So our grouping of vessel types across data sources may not be accurate all the time. So with the methodology and limitations in mind, now I'll show you some of the results from our new analysis of occurrence rates in the Salish Sea. So just a reminder, this graph on the left, you've seen a few slides ago. It's of the results from last year's analysis of occurrence rates in the Salish Sea. These are the results from what I'll call version 1 of the analysis that uses AIS data summarized in the form of average annual number of vessel visits. And then on the right, these are the results from our latest analysis of occurrence rates in the Salish Sea, where we use the summarized AIS data in grid form that shows vessel traffic as the number of nautical miles sailed. And we're showing the results as the rate of occurrence per 1,000 nautical miles sailed. So as you can see, the general trend of occurrence rates is still observed. The axes are different. We've got 10% on the y-axis of the right graph, and the left graph is 3% because we're looking at different vessel traffic metrics, vessel visits versus the number of nautical miles sailed. Bulk carriers still show the highest occurrence rates with generally lower accident rates. There is some variability between container ships, other cargo vessels, and tankers, which could be to do with the different years of vessel traffic information and marine occurrence information we're comparing. We might also see some changes in occurrence rates using the occurrence per nautical mile metric because the number of nautical miles per visit changes based on how the vessel behaves and its type. Over here, we still see that vehicle carriers and cruise ships show the lowest rate of occurrences in the Salish Sea, with cruise ships experiencing more accidents than vehicle carriers. Some of the most common types of incidents reported that make up these blue sections of the bars on the graph are things like a total failure of any system or a risk of an incident, so pretty minor. And some of the more common accident types that you'll see in the yellow or the very small bit of red, if there's any on there, those common accident types are elisions and collisions. So now we're just looking at the results from the most recent analysis when we're comparing the occurrence rates of vessels in the Salish Sea to the overall occurrence rates of the Pacific region, which includes the Salish Sea. We have the Pacific region on the left here and then Salish Sea on the right. We can see that once you get into a more confined space with a much higher concentration of vessels, you're seeing higher rates of occurrences. And these semi-transparent bars are there to show you the occurrence rates of cargo vessel subtypes that make up this cargo total bar. So it's kind of like the expanded version of that cargo total bar. This analysis it's a simple method of finding occurrence rates for different types of vessels. And we think it could contribute to a better understanding of shipping risk. We're wondering if using vessel visits to the region is a more helpful way to frame the data and the conversation rather than per 1,000 nautical miles sailed, since it might be easier to grasp. But vessels like tugs and ferries don't really visit the region in the same way as cargo vessels do. So it might be more challenging to capture their traffic that way. So nautical mile sailed is a helpful way to capture the traffic of those types of vessels. And we know the other presenters will provide a more detailed understanding of risk. And we're wondering if presenting data at a broader, more regional level would also be helpful in risk communication aimed at the public. So you saw some of the results of the Pacific region in the last slide, and we're finishing up the analysis for other regions across Canada. We'll publish a report with our methodology and results, which should be coming out this year. And we hope this is a useful follow-on project to the Marine Incidents and Accidents dashboard that will add context to the number of incidents and accidents reported in and around Canadian waters. As for the dashboard, we have plans to update it with more recent and more accurate marine occurrence information. And we also plan to apply some of the feedback and user suggestions we've received to this next iteration. You can find the link to the dashboard and the report for this project on our website. So feel free to visit it and play around. Let us know what you think. So thank you so much for your time and attention. We're open for any questions or comments. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Tessa, for the presentation. We do have one question in the chat, so I'll go to that one first. And if anybody else would like to ask questions about this project or the dashboard or future directions for this analysis, please feel free to raise your hand or put a question in the chat and we will go to you. So the first question we have is, how are LPG and LNG carriers categorized in this analysis?
Tankers, I believe.
Liquid tankers would make sense.
Mm-hmm. So we can see that
I think we have a category there, cargo liquid. And so I think they would fall into that one. Okay, are there any other questions for Tessa and the analysis she's been doing?
You can follow up by email as well if you have questions later. Happy to chat.
All right, so there's a question. Do you consider unreported incidents in this analysis? Have you estimated the rates of unreported incidences and how this varies among the categories of vessels?
That's a great question. No, we don't include those in this analysis. It'd be hard to quantify, I think. So that might be something we look into when we're doing our next version of the incidents and accidents dashboard, and expanding the data sources that we use for reported incidents and accidents is also something that we could look into as well.
Our next question is about the metric of the percentage of incidents per 1,000 nautical miles sailed. Can you talk a little bit more about how that metric is applied, Tessa?
Yeah, absolutely. So in this map here, you can see, I'll get it right here. So in those different grid cells, we have the number of nautical miles sailed for all of these different vessel types. And so we'll add those all together for this region of the Salish Sea. And then we have our marine incidents and accidents that also have a vessel type attached to those. So when we count how many incidents and accidents for, let's say, bulk carriers happen within this region, and then we'll divide that by the number of nautical miles sailed by bulk carriers in the same region for the same time frame as well. And then because that is such a small number, we'll multiply that by 1,000 nautical miles instead of per nautical mile to make it a little bit more, it's a number that you can understand a little bit better. So I hope that makes sense, but let me know if you have any other questions and I'd be happy to walk you through our methods a little bit more.
Yeah, Tessa, this is Nigel Greenwood. I asked that question. So do we interpret that as for bulk carriers, 5 would reflect 5 incidents per 1,000 miles sailed, or 0.05 instance per 1,000 miles sailed? Is that what you're saying?
So it's the rate of occurrences. So it would be 0.05 over 1,000 nautical miles sailed, and then that would be the percentage of about 70% occurrences. Yeah. Okay.
Or to put it in other terms, it's number of incidents per 100,000 miles sailed.
Sure. Yeah. Sure.
Okay.
And it's also vessels involved instead of marine incidents and accidents per, and that's just a distinction we make because you can have 2 vessels involved in one marine occurrence. So that's all.
Understood. Yes. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Nigel.
Our next question is, are you engaged with marine spatial planning efforts? And I would say just on behalf of Clear Seas that yes, we intend all of the majority of our work to go to support marine spatial planning efforts and certainly encourage people to use it for that purpose, and hope that we have other maps and other materials on our website that can be used in support of marine spatial planning. So we certainly encourage that. The next question is, will the PowerPoint be distributed? And absolutely, we're going to be putting the slides from all our presenters today along with the recording on the website, and I will share the link in the chat, and also we'll be sending this out to participants to let you know when it's up there so that you can download them at your leisure. Just to call your attention to the chat, Brian Kirk has commented to the question about risk communication. I think it could depend on how closely these results align with results from other work. I think that's a fair comment.
Yeah, definitely.
We have another question. How will these results be made available for other assessments of risk, published as a report or other methods?
Yeah, we will publish all of our methods, and we'll also have the data tables as well, so you can use that.
And if anybody does want to know more details about it, please do get in touch with us and we'd be happy to go through it in more specifics. Next question is, what is the vessel category or type that has the best performance of incidents against miles sailed, and which one is the worst? You can flip us over to that slide.
We sure can. So it depends on what region you're looking at, whether it's the Pacific or the Salish Sea. You look at cruise ships and they're looking pretty good for total occurrences reported in the Pacific. Tugs as well, but they tend to have a higher accident rates, including more serious accidents. We see this really small level, or this small line of red down here, which refers to the number of, or the rate of serious accidents that happen, where cruise ships don't really have the same. In terms of incidents, and when we think about incidents, we're thinking about those things like a risk of an incident happening or a failure of a system that they just had to report. So sometimes very, very minor things. Vehicle carriers don't have any reported accidents for our time frame that we chose for that region. So that would be something to take into account too. Sometimes it's not just how many occurrences are happening, it's the type. And that's kind of how we've tried to break that down with colors here with accidents, serious accidents, and incidents.
Okay, and our next question is, I'll go to Patrick first. Patrick, do you want to go ahead if you want more clarification on what Tessa has just said?
Well, no, it's a little bit different, but I guess it's along the same lines. It's really about this metric where we're looking at incidence rates per nautical miles, and I was thinking about this question about tugs, and I was wondering if there is any sort of density dependence here. Like, you have certain types of traffic where there's a lot of busyness, like a tug. Are you more likely to see an increase because of that busyness, which would translate into a higher proportion of incidence rates?
Well, we see that in the Salish Sea for some other vessel types for sure. You have a lot more traffic happening in a smaller area, so it's definitely more concentrated, and we see incident and accident rates go up. Tugs, I'm not so sure. I know that there's lots of nautical miles sailed, and there are quite a few incidents, but it tends to be pretty steady across the Pacific and the Salish Sea subregion in this map, or in this graph. And
I would jump in to add that a possible interpretation of that is a lot of the tug activity is in the Salish Sea area. Like tugs do operate outside the Salish Sea, of course, but our past study looking at tugs of opportunity has shown that a lot of the activity occurs in the Salish Sea region. So that could be an explainer as to why the tug rates of incidents are fairly similar in both the Pacific region and the Salish Sea region.
It's a strong spatial component. Okay.
Yeah, I think there definitely is a strong component there.
Yeah, thanks.
Our next question is asking, are we planning to run the analysis at a higher spatial resolution?
Yeah, we do. We do have plans to get a finer grid, and we used 50 kilometer by 50 kilometer. I'm just trying to find the graph here or the map here. Yeah, grid cells to create our region, and we can work with Transfer Canada to get that dialed down a little bit smaller, maybe 25 kilometers. But when we're aggregating all of these cells to look at regional occurrence rates, we have to, weigh the pros and cons about using more data if you're just trying to aggregate cells into an area. So we might do that, but I'm interested in hearing from other people about what they're doing and maybe see if that's necessary or not in going forward.
Yeah, to know if there'd be a specific purpose for that.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm. A question is, does the scope of incidents and accidents covered by these stats include all occurrences, for example, including personnel injuries?
That's a great question. And no, it doesn't. So we don't include incidents or accidents that happen on board vessels to staff working. That's something that we might change going forward in our next iteration of the Marine Incidents and Accidents dashboard and that data set. But we only, or that's the only type of marine occurrence that we don't include in this data set.
We've got some great questions, and we have a little bit of time if there are any more. Okay,
That's great. Thank you so much for all those questions. I really appreciate it. And I'm happy to talk to anybody who has a question afterwards, but thanks again.
Thank you so much for the presentation, Tessa. That's a great start to get our minds set into what kinds of rates and what kinds of vessels occurrences we're seeing in the Salish Sea region in the last few years. And I'm going to have another stab at this poll, see if it's going to work. Nope, still no good. I'll have to figure that out for some other time. Now, our next speaker is going to be, we're actually having two speakers from Transport Canada, and we are going to be looking at the emergency towing initiative that Transport Canada has been working on recently. So James Cook is the project lead for Transport Canada on this emergency towing initiative, and he will be starting off the presentation, and then Adrian Nicol will be continuing on, and he is the technical lead for Transport Canada on the risk assessment portion of the emergency towing initiative. So I would like to hand it over to James and Adrian to take us through Transport Canada's recent work.
For sure. Sorry, Megan, I can't share my screen right now.
Oh, you went out and came back. I will fix that, sorry. Adrian. There we go.
Booted. Oh, awesome. Thanks. Can you guys see my screen?
All right, I think I can certainly see it there, Adrian. Can everyone else see it? I assume they can if I can. So thanks, Megan. As she mentioned, my name is James Cook. I am the Transport Canada lead on the emergency towing file under the Oceans Protections Plan. I'm joined by my colleague today, Adrian Nicol, who is the technical lead on the risk assessment that they were using to help inform some decisions and objectives on this file. And I'll touch base on that in a moment. We do welcome any comments, questions, or considerations. This is a project that both Adrian and I are fairly passionate about. So once we get rolling on the presentation, we do like to kind of work our way through it. So if you do have any questions or comments, we kindly ask that you do hold them to the end, and we'll be happy to answer them at that time. Adrian, maybe if you just wanted to flip to the next slide there. Perfect. So here's a quick overview of the presentation today. Obviously, the purpose is to give an overview of the initiative and the proposed risk assessment process. Before doing that, in my part of the presentation is essentially to kind of set a bit of context and situate where this risk assessment is going to fit into the broader initiative, and kind of give a general overview of some of the other objectives and some of the other work going on before Adrian dives into the intricacies related to the risk assessment. So Adrian, if you just want to flip to the next slide again quickly. Thank you. So very quickly, here's just a general overview and quick description of what we mean when we talk about emergency towing. So emergency towing is used is conducted to assist disabled vessels. Essentially, the objective is to prevent incidents, ensure crew safety, and prevent and/or mitigate spills or additional environmental damage. Vessels are often towed on a non-emergency basis in Canada. For example, a vessel that is seaworthy but in need of repairs may be towed from one location to another during calm weather. For large ocean-going vessels, and by that we're kind of referring to vessels that tend to be 33 meters and longer, specialized towing vessels and crew are needed to provide safe and effective emergency towing services. And just along the bottom of the screen there, we have some examples of large disabled vessels that have become disabled in Canadian waters, maybe over the last decade or so. So overall, the primary objective of this initiative is to develop a more formalized approach for emergency towing in Canada. So the primary objective is kind of to develop a national strategy on emergency towing. However, obviously, that's going to take a couple years to complete. So upon launching this initiative, a couple of immediate gaps were identified in emergency tow capacity in Canada. So there were some short-term measures put in place to increase capacity in the short term while we develop this national strategy. So those two short-term measures are listed on the screen here. One is tow kits, and there's kind of an example of a tow kit and what we mean by it on the bottom of the screen there. And so those have been successfully procured and delivered to some strategic locations across the country. The other, and perhaps the most notable, is the lease of 2 emergency tow vessels on the West Coast. Now, those originally were leased for 3 years, but most recently in November, we did receive a 1-year contract extension for those 2 vessels, that being the Atlantic Raven and the Atlantic Eagle. That the reason for that being is originally this risk assessment that Adrian is going to speak to in a moment here was not actually included as part of the process for that national strategy development. So we did have to adjust some timelines and adjust that lease accordingly. So here I'll just give a very quick overview of the national strategy development. Essentially, there are 3 primary objectives. The first being identify what capacity is required nationally and by region. Now, this is the objective that the risk assessment that Adrian will speak to in a moment here will primarily feed into. The second is to determine how ET will be funded and operated. And the third is to clarify roles and responsibilities for emergency towing in Canadian waters. So a few things that are going to be feeding into the development of these objectives. And the one I just mentioned, obviously, is the risk assessment, which is currently under development. Now, although that will be one of the primary inputs into kind of trying to complete and answer that objective 1, which is trying to identify what capacity is required, we do just want to be very clear that it is just one of several inputs and considerations that will be going in to making that decision, which will ultimately be a political decision. But we will be using that to inform some recommendations based on certain capacity allocation and amount. So other things we have going on is in the summer, we are going to be doing a study on international emergency towing systems in studies. And ultimately what we'll be doing there is kind of scoping international systems for emergency towing that do exist and are used by other countries, and kind of trying to get a better sense of how they're funded and how they are operated, which will ultimately be used as kind of a background or a research paper to inform an options paper on different kinds of potential funding and governance models. So we do plan to kind of have that completed in the spring of 2023. And then we do plan on engaging on that options paper to solicit input from across the country on potential options and then refining them. And then ultimately we're trying to put some options to government for that national strategy in the fall of 2024. So that's it for me on the first part, and I'll pass it over to Adrian Nickel here, who will dive into the intricacies of the risk assessment.
All right, thanks so much, James. So now I'll go through some of that background to the risk assessment, the questions that we're trying to answer, the approach that we're proposing to take, along with the stages and timelines to the risk assessment. So this risk assessment aims to answer, 4 primary research questions that are national in scope, and the questions here are as follows, as you can see on the screen. So one being, where are large vessels currently and in the future more likely to become disabled in Canadian waters? Currently and in the future, where are and when are large vessels more likely to get into accidents in Canadian waters? Number 3, where are the areas of highest risk for each accident type? And then 4, identifying which high risk areas have existing industry and government towing capacity and where that capacity gap currently exists. I'm just flipping on to slide 7 here now. So at a high level, the approach to assessing risk is going to be the product of probability and consequences. So for the probability portion of the risk assessment, we intend to use ship accident models to compute the expected number of ship accidents. So the accident types that we are modeling include collisions, fire explosions, groundings that contains powered and non-powered groundings, hull machinery damage, and then strikings, or commonly referred to as collisions. So the results from the probability portion will be presented by accident type, vessel size, per month and per year. In terms of consequences, we have still not landed on our approach to measuring or calculating consequences. We are still working internally and with our partners to come to a decision on how it might be assessed. So in addition to the probability and consequence portions, we're also conducting an additional study for tugs and government vessels of opportunity. So this analysis will be very similar to the approach done by Clear Seas via NUCA Consulting on the availability of tugs of opportunity in Canada's Pacific region. So the study we'd be conducting will be done for all of Canada, whereas that study was just done for the Pacific region. So the goal here would be to identify current geographic areas where there might be capacity gaps in terms of towing capacity. So I'll just flip on to slide 8 now. So the next 2 slides provide a bit more background to the ship accident models that we've been developing, and that will be used for that probability portion of the risk assessment. So I'll begin with how we've gone about developing the accident rates that feed into the models, then provide a bit of a general overview of how the accident models work, or their workflow of it. I won't go into detail today on each of the accident models, but that is contained within the annex, and if there are questions on that, we can go to that later. But anyway, we'll talk about the rates now. So the information that are one of the bases in the accident models are the accident rates. So these accident rates are derived using IHS market accident data from 2005 to 2018 in combination with vessel traffic metrics, that being distance sailed, and encounters from satellite-based AIS data that the Government of Canada has access to from 2015 to 2018. So the data were analyzed for waters that are similar to Canada. So we're looking at waters in Europe, North America, and then in Northeastern Asia, so that being Japan and South Korea. So the accident rates for most of the accident models that we've developed are by accident type, obviously, and then it's further stratified by geographic area. So that's by port, internal waters, 12 to 24 nautical miles, and then the open sea. Then we've also broken it down by 3 high-level vessel types. So that's commercial, non-commercial, and others. Commercial ships are like cargo, dry bulk, containers, and tankers. And then non-commercial ships are like government research vessels, fishing, pleasure vessels, and tugs. Then it's also broken down by high-level vessel sizes, so less than 1,000 gross tons, 1,000 to 10,000 gross tons, and then greater than 10,000 gross tons. So this amasses to about 36 accident rates per accident model, with the exception of the collision model. So the collision model, again, an average yearly accident rate is also created, but they're not stratified by vessel size just because we don't have enough collision data for that. So essentially there are 24 accident rates that feed into the collision model. They're broken down again by that geographic area, like I just mentioned, and then they're also broken down by general vessel type interaction. So that's because we're using encounters to determine that. So I'll move on to slide 9 here. So this slide provides a visual generalized example of the ship accident model's workflows. So the results from these models will be generated by a 25 kilometer by 25 kilometer grid over Canadian waters, very similar to what Tessa was showing in her last presentation. So that's kind of that grid that we'd be working with, right? So the models will essentially provide information on the expected number of accidents by accident type, vessel type, size, as well as month per year, as I was mentioning before. So how they work is they basically multiply a level of exposure with corresponding accident rates. And for some of the models, environmental data like bathymetry and wind data are taken into consideration. So basically, again, how it works is we input fused AIS data. So this is the positional messages. So the fusion of AIS is coming from our land-based sources via the Canadian Coast Guard, and then it's fused with satellite-based AIS that the Government of Canada also gets. So just combine those sources so we have a relatively comprehensive understanding of AIS in Canada. Anyway, that's combined with static vessel information from marine intelligence databases like Marine Traffic, myshiptracking.com, Industry Canada's database as well, and it classifies the AIS by vessel type and size. So these are fed into the level exposure algorithms or tools to determine the vessel traffic metrics like distance sailed and encounters. So then that information right there is combined with the spatial grid that has those accident rates associated with each grid per geographic area, vessel type, and size. So again, imagine that grid that Tessa was showing before. All of those would have like an accident rate associated with it, and then the level of exposures being the new traffic data that would be going into it. So again, the models can determine expected accidents by vessel type, size per month and year. So I'm just going to flip on to slide 10 now, and I'll talk a bit about the stages to the risk assessment. So we have 3 stages laid out right now. stage one being historical context. So aiming to just provide some contextual background to Canada, data being used in the assessment. So, performing a very simple vessel traffic analysis for each of the regions in Canada. I think we'll be leveraging ClearSea's work on the ship accident analysis. It's a wonderful platform and easy to use by the general public. So, basically just telling our users to look at that. Then obviously that tugs and government vessels of opportunity study in stage one. Now, stage two is kind of where that risk assessment begins. So this is where we'll be doing the baseline risk assessment for all of Canada. So we intend to use 2019 as a baseline year for this portion, as it was the most representative year of vessel traffic. We saw a dip in 2020 and it pretty much held true for 2021. So anyway, during stage two, the probability assessment will use the ship accident models to predict where and when expected ship accidents by vessel type and size would occur for a baseline year. And then, as mentioned before, we have that consequence approach, but it's still under development. So after the stage, we'd hopefully combine both to derive the risk results. Then in addition to this, we'd overlay the information from the tugs and government of vessels opportunity study to help determine locations and times where there could be current low capacity but high risk. And then in stage three, so this is where we'd be diving into more regional risk assessments across Canada. So we refer to this as like the scenario-based risk assessment for each region in Canada. So the idea here would be to conduct engagement sessions to gather information on shipping-related scenarios for each region in Canada, then use these information gathered at these sessions, along with some statistical forecasting for ship traffic. We would rerun the ship accident models to determine the scenario-based probabilities for each region. And then we'd be able to combine this ideally with the consequence information to derive the scenario-based risks across Canada. And we can compare this back to the baseline stuff, right? Again, we'd hopefully overlay information from the tugs of government, vessels of opportunity study to determine the locations and times where there's low towing capacity, but high scenario-based risk. Now, I'll finally talk briefly on the timelines. I just want to make it clear that these are subject to changes, but some preliminary timelines for now. So we're hopeful that the draft methodology and model validation and calibration will be completed by spring 2022 and then sent out for peer review right after that. After the methodology has been peer reviewed and changes have been made, we'll rerun the models and have the baseline risk results by fall 2022. So that'd be the baseline risk results for all of Canada. After the baseline risk results, so that's stage two, have been completed, we'll begin the regional risk assessment. So that's scenario-based risk stuff sequentially. So we'll start with the West Coast in fall 2022, and then ultimately all the other risk assessments will follow that. And then ideally we'd have all of those risk assessments completed and finalized by winter 2024. And then that information will be one of the key inputs to help inform the long-term strategy, like James was mentioning before, but just one of the many inputs that are going into that. And yeah, that concludes the presentation for today. Thank you for your time. Open to questions now.
Thank you very much, James and Adrian. It's certainly is a lot of work going into understanding the nature of risk. So we do have a couple of questions that are in the chat so far, and I'll go through those and then Derek will get to your question. So first, Adrian, what types of accidents or incidents are included in this study?
Yeah, so those are, let's just go back to that slide, but I believe it's collisions. Oops, sorry. Oh, it isn't, my bad. Yeah, so it's collisions, collisions, fire explosions, groundings, so that's powered and non-powered, hull machinery damage, and then strikings or elisions. So five or six accident types, right? With powered and non-powered grounding could be. There's separate models anyway in our assessment.
Thank you. The next question is, have you considered separating the ships in the analysis by whether they are piloted or not piloted vessels?
Yeah, no, we haven't done that. So that would be like in terms of the accident rates, maybe, is that what you're getting at?
I think so.
Yeah, I'll just elaborate.
Nigel,
here.
yeah, go ahead and
Nigel Greenwood,
elaborate.
yeah. In the work that I've done, particularly for the Pacific Pilotage Authority, we're always concerned about drawing distinctions between vessels that are either piloted or unpiloted. The assumption being that the very significant training and experience the pilots have would mitigate or lead to lower accident rates. So it strikes me that 1,000 tons is a convenient threshold, but it doesn't really relate to distinguishing vessels that are piloted from those that are not piloted, which would generally be below 500 or below 350 tons.
Okay, that's good to know. I think we can look at adding that size threshold then into the general vessel sizes, so that we could, you know, kind of stratify it that way anyway. I think that would be helpful. We can take a look at it and see if we have enough accident data, but I think that'd be helpful. So Nigel, just to follow up with you, you're saying it would be like another category from like greater than 350 gross tons?
Well, it depends what pilotage area you're talking about, because the rules change across Canada. But here in the Pacific Pilotage Authority, it's 350 gross tons of combined tonnage. So where you have a tug and tow, it would be the tonnage of the tug plus its tow. But yeah, that's just a consideration, because part of the issue for particularly navigationally related accidents is the level of experience and competence of the masters or crew, of which the pilots are a significant augmentation when the ship's under pilotage. The other question I have that's sort of related to that is, why are you including fires and explosions in your database there? Because they're not necessarily related to density of traffic or navigational difficulty.
Yeah, so that's a good question, Nigel. So the reason that we're including fire explosions is because we're including all accident types that emergency tow vessel could either mitigate or respond to. So if a fire explosion board on a vessel, emergency tow vessel could technically go and respond to that. So that's the justification as to why that's included.
Fair enough. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
It's a good comment on the pilotage and the differences we see throughout Canada and different pilotage regions, and maybe that's an element that comes into the regional based scenarios when the study gets to that point as a thought.
Yeah.
The next question we have, Derek, we may need a little bit of elaboration. Your question is, was any work done on mitigations to reduce probability or severity as part of the risk assessment? And Adrian, if you want to take a stab at it, or if you'd like Derek to provide some more context.
Yeah, I think I could try to, but it's not really for the baseline anyway. We're not looking at mitigating that. I think one of the ways that we're looking to do that is within the non-power grounding model in the scenario-based runs, where we basically place an emergency tow vessel in a grid cell, and then it's applied basically a mathematical function to reduce the probability of an event occurring. So that's kind of the only way I see it, but I could be misinterpreting your question. So if you wanted, you could elaborate more, and then we could go from there.
No, I was just kind of curious. You mentioned the the probability times severity, but you're basing it just on historic numbers, not on mitigations. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Exactly.
Okay, understood.
So our next question is asking, are you considering non-AIS vessel traffic for the probability of incidents?
Yeah, so good question, thanks. But for this assessment, at the moment, we're not, but I think for the scenario-based runs, that's something that we could start to include. We could start to rise some of the level of exposures where there's non-AIS vessels and run it for the scenario-based runs. But I think at the same time, we need to remember that, emergency tow vessel is probably not going to, tow away a non-AIS vessel, because it's probably relatively small, so it could to attach them because to attach on a smaller vessel, it might actually cause quite a bit of damage to it. So at this moment in the scenario, in the regional, sorry, in stage 2, we're not considering non-AIS vessels, but it could be considered within the scenario-based runs if that's what people want to see run.
If it's okay, can I elaborate on that
Absolutely.
question a
Go
little
ahead.
bit?
Go ahead,
Okay.
Patrick.
It's not so much about towing the AIS vessels, it's about the rate of incidences. So you can have large vessels in areas that are densely occupied or busy with non-AIS traffic, and you might see an uptick in incidence rates. So that's one of the reasons why I was thinking about non-AIS vessels and your probability of incidence. And I mean, we've done quite a bit of work in the Salish Sea anyways, looking at non-AIS traffic and trying to quantify that in terms of temporal patterns as well as pretty highly resolved spatial patterns. So it could feed into your probability model. And the second question was along the lines of, I was really curious about the consequence side. Most of these risk assessments that I've seen in the past are very good at making assessments in terms of the probability of an incident occurring. And I was wondering who's involved in developing your consequence side, because that can, and that often is quite a bit more problematic.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So we haven't come to an agreement upon the consequences yet, something that we're still working on internally. So within Transport Canada and the Canadian Coast Guard. And also we have some partners with the Pacific North Coast nations as well. So we're chatting with them as well to try and come to a conclusion on consequences that are included in this risk assessment. But that's pretty much as far as I can go right now. To be transparent with you, Patrick.
Fair enough.
Great. Our next question for Adrian is from Brian Kirk. Do you have the encounter algorithm developed yet? Can you say any more about what factors it will consider?
Yeah, for sure. That's a good question. So for our encounter algorithm, we're going to be using the encounter that's very similar to the Born and Schultz 2019 stuff. So that's the one that takes the heading and course into consideration to make the ellipse around the vessel. So it'll be like a modified Fuji with Born in 2019 study. So that's basically 8 times the length, and then the domain will be bigger or smaller based on the heading and course of the vessel. We weren't able to do the sensitivity study if that was the question as well. We just didn't have time for it. So we had to go that route.
The next question is referring to the 4 geographic areas for the study when we get into the regional analysis component. How do those areas get rolled up into the 25 square kilometer grids? Do you use one rate or are they averaged together?
Yeah, no, so each rate is different within the grid. So like, for example, grid cells that intersect with the port locations will be applied the port accident rates. And then grid cells that intersect with the internal waters locations will be applied those rates, et cetera, and so forth. So it's not, they're not all averaged. They're kind of split out that way.
And then a comment that the PRMM document has a good template for consideration of consequences. And Nigel, just to be sure I don't get the acronym wrong, can you tell us what that stands for?
Yeah, that's the Transport Canada's pilotage risk management methodology document. It's the touchstone for consideration of hypothetical changes to pilotage regulations and the consideration of the possible impacts on both accident rates and then relating them to consequences, both material, personnel, environmental, financial, et cetera. So that's a good place to start if you're thinking about constructing some sort of a construct of consequences that marries with recent practice of risk assessment.
Good to know. Thank you, Nigel. We'll take a look into that.
All right. Are there any other questions for James or Adrian on TC's plans for emergency towing. I just want to flag, I shared in the chat from Lovell Pratt of the Friends of the San Juan Islands that there was a recent 2021 vessel drift and response analysis done for the Strait of Juan de Fuca and to the southern Strait of Georgia. And the link to that report is in the chat, if anybody would like to take a look at it.
Thank you.
All right. Are there any other questions for TC? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much, James and Adrian. That was a really great overview of the work that's underway and looking forward to seeing it evolve.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks so much.
So our next speaker today is Brian Kirk, and he is the Prevention Section Manager for the Washington State Department of Ecology's Spills Program. He leads a team of professional engineers, vessel inspectors, oil transfer inspectors, and risk specialists, and manages the oil spill prevention activities to protect Washington waters. Brian previously worked at the University of Washington and completed a 20-year career in the U.S. Navy. He served in a variety of positions and ashore, including chief engineer on destroyers and cruisers, and roles on aircraft carrier-based staffs. Brian has a master's in operations research from the Naval Postgraduate School and is a graduate of the Marine Maritime Academy and the U.S. Naval War College. And he will be talking to us about the work that the Washington Department of Ecology has been doing on risk modeling.
All right. Yeah, thanks, Megan. So as Megan mentioned, I'm Brian Kirk with the Washington State Department of Ecology Spills Program. And I'm very happy to be with you here this morning to talk about the oil spill risk model that we're developing. I'll go ahead and start sharing my screen. All right, so hopefully that's popping up. So on the screen there, you'll see listed the members of the model development team. Today is especially a treat for me. The team doesn't normally let me talk about their work, but as luck would have it, J.D. Leahy, who leads our outreach efforts, was not able to join us today, and so they kicked it to the B team, which is me, to try to do a good job of representing all the efforts that have gone into it. But I do want to be very clear that all of the work that you're going to see here today and the thought behind it, that is a product of this team. So not my work. This is their work. So Adam, Alex S., Michael Kahufkin, JD, James Murphy, and Alex Suchar. This is their work that I'm doing my best to represent. All right, so here's some of the things that we'll talk about today, and then I'm really looking forward to any questions or comments that you might have as we get to the end. So the direction for the Washington State Department of Ecology to create an oil spill model that came to us from our bosses, which is the people of the state of Washington via the Washington State Legislature, who told us back in 2019 to develop an oil spill risk model, and then to use that model to conduct 2 analysis projects. So one of those projects is to look at whether an emergency response towing vessel that serves Haro Strait, Boundary Pass, and Rosario Strait will reduce oil spill risks, and whether a tug escort system could reduce spill risks from certain types of tank vessels. So, that was in 2019. That's when we started work on this project. It's now early in 2022. So within, that time frame, and then by the time we have to deliver these analysis reports to the legislature in September of 2023, we have to build a brand new quantitative oil spill risk model and conduct 2 fairly substantial analysis projects. So pretty tall order, and the team has been hard at work ever since. So today represents some of the progress that we've made and where we're heading in the future. So we'll start by talking a little bit about, what is an oil spill risk model, why anyone would want to build it, and what are some of the components that are going into our model. So one way to think about an oil spill risk model is as a decision support tool, and as a way to quantitatively look at policy decisions. And you can either do that, before the fact or after the fact. You can think about policy measures that you might want to put into place and try to get a sense of how they would impact the system. Or you can evaluate policy measures that have already been implemented and see if you can determine a change from those things. Oil spill risk assessment in this region is not new. There's a long history here. So you can say that it goes back to 1981 when there was some analytical work done to think about the size of oil tankers within the Puget Sound. And the question here revolved around whether it would be better or worse from a spill risk perspective if you were to restrict the size of oil tankers to below 125,000 deadweight tons, right? And so, an argument for having larger vessels would be, you could say that there would be fewer of those ships. And so if your accidents are happening on a per mile or per hour basis, fewer ships should lead to less accidents and therefore less risk. And of course, the opposite side of that argument is bigger ships contain more oil. And if you do have an accident, then there's a greater chance that it'll be catastrophic. So that was an early look. And not to give away the ending, but they did in fact put into place the 125,000 deadweight ton restriction on oil tankers within Puget Sound that is still in place today. And then after that, there was a fairly steady drumbeat of activity. There was a study in 1997 conducted by the Department of Transportation Volpe Center, and then a series of vessel traffic risk assessments that were led by the George Washington University and Virginia Commonwealth University team as they developed an oil spill risk model that was specific to this region. So, this is nothing new. The idea of using one of these tools to take a look at spill risk in this area, and as we've heard this morning, this continues to be an active area of interest and of work. Before anyone would start to build an oil spill risk model, which is a complicated undertaking, you might want to ask, well, why would you want to? Why is this tool a good way of thinking about spill risk in the maritime environment? And we can point to a couple of reasons why a risk model could be an effective tool. The maritime system is complex, right? You have a system of rules that are in place that govern behavior. And then you have a whole bunch of individual actors that get to make decisions along the way, which is an excellent recipe for complexity once you put that system into motion. So it's really hard to think about things like low probability events occurring without having a tool that allows you to see the bigger picture. The maritime system is also opaque. There's just a lot of things that we can't know. There's conversations and decisions that take place on the bridge of a vessel. There's interactions between vessels and the vessel traffic service. There's factors like the fatigue of the individuals involved. All of that stuff is invisible to us. And then even the things that are more readily apparent, data can be hard to come by, and data coming from different sources can be measured and reported differently. All of those things make the maritime system hard to see into. the knowledge about the maritime environment tends to be dispersed, and it's dispersed in a couple of different ways, right? So one of it points back to, you know, that idea that you have these people on the bridges of individual vessels that are making decisions, having conversations, and taking actions. You know, and that's not immediately available to us. But also, you know, knowledge about the system resides in different places. So you have maritime pilots that have a lot of experience and expertise. You have tribes and First Nations that spend a great deal of time out on the water interacting with these vessels and you know, having their own experiences with how vessels behave and what risks are apparent. You have different sectors of the maritime industry that has knowledge of pieces of it, but perhaps not all of it. And so, you know, one thing that we're attempting to accomplish is by creating a model in a transparent way and involving tribes and stakeholders throughout, we're hoping to gather and gain the benefits of some of that knowledge. You know, another reason why you would want to build an oil spill risk model is because of the catastrophic nature of a large spill should one occur. The probability may be low, but the consequences are severe. And these are things that, you know, no one who is involved in movement of vessels on the water, no one wants these to occur. And so that demands a constant attention to how the system is performing and where you can continue to identify and reduce risk. So that's some of the motivation. You know, along with the highly motivating factor of our bosses told us to do it, so we had better get cracking. You know, so another question you could ask is, well, why build your own? Why not just buy one off the shelf? That certainly seems easier. And you know, when you get into the specifics of what it is that a oil spill risk model that is useful for the state of Washington needs to accomplish, it turns out that there's not a huge inventory of options to choose from. You know, we're showing a few examples of models that do exist here. The one on the top marks that's produced and maintained by DNVGL. And, you know, we have made use of that model in the past through contracts with DNVGL. You know, Samson is another model, which I believe was used within Canada for some area risk studies. You know, and then of course, you know, down here, we're familiar with the George Washington University model that's out there. So you know, there are some examples. But reasons why we would want to build our own is because there is a lot of interest in this work, and we don't anticipate that demand for transparency and for knowledge and for insight going away anytime soon. You know, there are always, as long as there is a need to transport big volumes of stuff from place to place, there are going to be ships, you know, moving through the waters that we care about. And so therefore, there are always going to be questions about the risks involved. So having our own tool allows us to address those questions over time. You know, and going along with that, having our own model reduces our dependence on contracts. And it's, you know, it gets very difficult when you're in the middle of an analysis project. You know, and when you ask questions of a model, what does that lead to? It leads to more questions. And if you're doing that work on a contract basis, then you're always having to feed more quarters into the slot to try to get to the next answer. And so there's an advantage to having a tool that we can make use of over time, even if we can't answer all of the questions right now. You know, we can keep going back and we can keep adding to, you know, to the knowledge base. You know, another benefit of us doing this work is it grows our internal capacity and resources. So, you know, building a model is hard. You learn things along the way. We're very fortunate to have such a smart team that came to us with a whole bunch of knowledge and capabilities. And now they're, you know, developing their knowledge further through the process of building this model. So that gives us a lot of power, you know, here at Ecology to, you know, to ask and answer questions. And then the final benefit, you know, of doing this via a public agency is transparency. You know, because we are a public agency, because Washington has very strong public disclosure and information sharing laws, you know, this is a transparent model. It's extremely frustrating to everyone when you try to probe into, you know, what the results of an analysis mean, and you bump into proprietary restrictions, or you just get to a point where you can't see inside the box that's producing the results. And what we can tell you is, you know, everything that we are doing is open. We're always happy to have conversations with tribes, with stakeholders, you know, members of the public, and as much detail as you want to know, we are prepared to share with you. So, you know, that's some of the reasons why we think this is a good idea. You know, so how are we doing so far? You know, as I've said, we have an amazing team in place. Adam, Alex, Michael, JD, and James. There's a whole bunch of PhDs in there. They're doing tremendous work. Adam is driving the model development project and also doing a lot of our data management. Alex Hess and JD, they come to us from the maritime industry, so they provide that knowledge and perspective. And they are also helping with model development, validation. And Alex Hess, who's on the call with us here today, he is our project manager for the analysis projects themselves. James and Alex are statisticians and modelers, and they are creating, along with Michael, the mechanics of how the model works. We've done extensive outreach and collaboration so far. We have more of that coming up very soon. We've done, I think, about 10 webinars, 8 technical discussions. We see wide interest in this work. We've had audiences up to about 130. And, you know, there's a core group of about 30 people that participate in almost every session that we host. And we're deeply grateful for the people who do come, who stick with us. You know, while we try to explain what it is we're doing, they ask us hard questions, and they, you know, help hold us accountable to produce a tool that's going to be useful for the people of Washington. We're in the process now of trying to get the model development buttoned up to actually get to a functioning model. And, you know, at the same time, we are transitioning planning and effort into those first 2 analysis projects. So looking at the potential oil spill reduction of an ERTV for Harrow Strait, Boundary Pass, Rosario Strait, and looking at the potential risk reductions of tug escorts for selected types of tank vessels. So that's kind of where we're at now. You know, so I want to set a little bit of a framework here, and, you know, talk about the building blocks of the conceptual model itself. And these are JD's slides that I'm attempting to do some justice to, and JD likes to start in the middle with the vessel accident module, so that's where we'll start. But the vessel accident module, so the conceptual model consists of a series of modules, and in each module, certain functions are handled. So in the vessel accident module, that's where the bad things happen. So we've got a list of hazards, and then we use probabilities of bad things happening and some mechanistic models to estimate how many accidents might occur in a given scenario. You know, what happens sequentially after that in the model is oil could come out of a vessel. And so we're going to estimate, you know, how much oil could come out from a particular accident. And that's one of the risk metrics that we're looking at, right? So how do you measure relatively how good or bad a particular scenario is? Oil outflow is a component of that. But in order to have accidents and oil outflow, you've got to have ships. So our vessel movement module is really what kicks the whole thing off. And that's where we simulate vessel traffic. And then once that traffic is moving around within the model domain, ships begin to encounter other ships. Ships come close to shallower water. So we have an encounter module that will generate opportunities for collisions and powered groundings. Other hazard types are handled a little bit differently. So for example, we have a probability of a loss of propulsion event occurring. And then when a loss of propulsion event does occur, a whole bunch of exciting things kick off. But it leads to, once the momentum has dissipated from the vessel and the vessel is at the mercy of winds and currents, then the drift model begins to take over and to move the vessel around, which could eventually lead to a drift grounding. So that's the conceptual framework of the model and how it all holds together logically. So for today, what I really wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about was the simulation piece of it itself. So, a little bit different from some other risk assessments. We felt it was important to simulate vessel traffic and simulate accidents happening. And the reasons why we think that we can and should do that are a few key assumptions. Right. So one is that historical observations, what happened in the past, represents one version of what could have happened. So we have the AIS record of where vessels went. We have accident and incident information about bad things that did occur. But all of those were predicated on the way that events took place on those particular days. And if one ship had been a little bit earlier, one ship had been a little bit later, there was a loss of propulsion event in there somewhere, that could have resulted in additional incidents or accidents. So our key assumption number two, just because you don't see something, it doesn't mean that the risk of that particular event is zero, right? These are low probability occurrences. And that's fantastic. But it's the constant challenge of maritime analysis, right? Which is, you want to know more about those bad things, but those bad things are hard to find. So you really have to go looking for them. And then the final assumption kind of results from the first two, which is oil spills come from accidents. Accidents come from different vessel traffic configurations, interventions, and occurrences. And so if you can generate a sufficiently large number of different possible scenarios, that can help you think about the distribution of oil spill risk. So that's what underpins our simulation. So in order to have an effective vessel movement simulation, the traffic needs to look like what happened in the past, but there has to be some variability in there, right? So we talk about that as being credible but unique. So credible, it has to occur within the same constraints that actual vessel traffic did. Unique, you want to have that randomness, so we're not just replaying the same events that did occur in the past over and over again, because you don't have an opportunity to learn new things and gain insight, just from that historic record. All right, so we'll take a little trip now and just see how this functions in our vessel movement module. So we think about vessels in a number of different categories, and one of those is a route-based vessel. So this is something like a container ship or a bulk carrier that comes into the system. It's going to a particular place. it's going to do a thing, and then it's going to go someplace else, right? So vessels, they populate at the edge of the study area, and you pull information from historical vessels, and then you estimate some other things. The route that a ship takes, you pull that from a distribution of historical routes, and we run our ships at historic speeds. All right, so we push the big green button on our oil spill risk model. Things start to happen. And here we go. We have our first vessel entering the system. So this one happens to be a bulk carrier with the dimensions that you see. So that vessel proceeds along a route, and that route is taken from historic distribution, and it's running at a speed that you would expect to see a bulk carrier run at. So it goes along, but now it gets to a place in the water where ships make decisions. And so once we reach one of those places, so we're calling it a waypoint. I mean, it's kind of more of a line, but way line doesn't sound very good. So we just call it a waypoint. Once you reach a waypoint, now there's a choice to make. And so what that ship in the simulation is going to do next is based on what ships like it did in the past. Right, so some of this is a little bit notional, but here's a fairly decent representation of where bulk carriers go. So our ship in the simulation is going to do a draw based on that distribution, and it's going to pick a direction. Right, so in this case, it picked Harrow Strait to head up north. Now once it's picked the overall route, there's a bunch of specific tracks that individual ships that are taking that route have used in the past. And so our ship is going to grab one of those. So now we have something that is credible. This is what ships like this do, but it's also unique because at this particular moment in time, this ship decided to follow this path here. All right, so the ship proceeds along that track, and it gets up here to another waypoint. So this is another juncture where ships in the past have made decisions. Most of them keep going to their destination. Some of them turn off and anchor. So when you anchor, you have to anchor in a specific anchorage location. And there can't be anybody else in that anchorage. And this turns out to be, surprisingly complicated. So, Alex Suchar, I think he added a few gray hairs, just figuring out this piece of it, which seems pretty simple, but gets complicated pretty quickly. So, you have different options of where you can go. But you got to go to some place that's empty. And once you do that, you need to stay there for a certain amount of time. So we draw that length of time from the distribution of how long ships stayed in that particular anchorage in the past. All right, then that time elapses. Now it's time for you to go someplace else. Again, the vessel is going to select a direction and then a track based on what ships have done in the past. This is another area where we bumped into some challenges, because if you just consider where you're starting from, then you can see some weird behavior, like ships getting stuck, just circling between those waypoints and constantly going back and forth from anchorage to a waypoint, or more ships than you would want driving up to an anchorage and then just turning around and leaving the system again. So we said, well, that's not ideal. So what the modelers did was reach back to waypoints and say, okay, where did ships go when they came from here and then went to anchor? And that, that helps solve some of those problems. Okay, so, now we drive along and eventually we get to the destination for that ship. We determine how long it's going to stay there, and then after that time elapses, it'll go on and do something else. So that's for route-based vessels. And then we have a category of vessels that we're calling dependent vessels. And so an example of that is escort tugs. Excuse me. So here, you want the behavior of that vessel to be based on something else. We didn't want a whole bunch of escort tugs just driving out to open water and escorting nothing. So in this case, the escort tug activity is triggered by a laden tanker that needs an escort coming into an area where an escort is required. So here's a crude tanker, coming along. The arrival in the system of that crude oil tanker wakes up an escort tug at a location where escort tugs come from. And, the escort tug knows where the tanker is going to be. So the escort tug in the simulation gets underway and sets a course to meet up with the tanker. Once it does meet up with the tanker, then they proceed along in company, as you would expect. Okay, so I know I'm at or over my time, but I just wanted to run through a little bit about the details of how the simulation works. So where are we now? As I'm sitting here and enjoying this conversation with you, the team is hard at work, and we are putting a lot of effort into finalizing the development of this initial version of the model. And this initial version of the model will be focused on those things that are needed to accomplish the first two analysis projects. So in some cases, there's things that we would like to build out for the full model development. We plan on, adding those functionalities, but we are down to the point where we are having to make some choices about what goes into this first iteration of the model. So that's what the team is doing, and we're working on our planning for the two upcoming analysis projects. That work is well underway. We do have scopes of work for each of those projects that have been approved. Those scopes of work are available. We've got a website that we are launching soon that'll have that information on it, and we put those scopes of work out for public review and comment. So that piece is in place. We'll be resuming outreach for the analysis projects soon. So within the next month, you'll start to see announcements and invitations to come join us for those outreach discussions. And then, we always have one eye on the deadline, which is the reports that are due to the Washington State Legislature in September 2023. All right, and that is the presentation. I will stop sharing, but I can pick it back up if there's a particular thing that that people want to look at, and I'm happy to answer any of your questions. And we've got, as I said, Alex S. with us, the project manager for the two analysis projects, and he can certainly speak to a lot of the details too.
Thank you so much, Brian. That was an excellent overview of not only how you've gone about developing your model, but why anybody would want to develop a model in the first place. So I really appreciated that breakdown and background. Reminded me of the quote from George Box: "All models are wrong, but some models are useful." And it sounds like you've gone about this in a way to try and make it one of the useful ones. So I'm seeing a hand from Patrick O'Hara. So please go ahead, Patrick.
Yeah, thanks. I also put a comment in there. This is great, Brian, because I've run up against those black box proprietary models many times, and you can't question them because they're always brushed off as the industry standard, and it's really hard to dig deep into these things and understand how they come up with these risks. So I think I can see this generating some really useful discussion down the road. So I'm really looking forward to seeing the outcome. I had a couple of questions, and one of them was about how you're combining your simulations to produce, I assume some sort of risk map or some sort of quantification of risk that combines all these different simulations that you're putting together. And I was wondering if you're doing this stochastically. It looks to me like you're doing it stochastically, and that you're sort of basing your simulations on these probabilities that are inherent in the tracks and the different proportion of vessels. Is that the way you're combining your simulations?
Yeah, and I think the real answer to that question is probably going to come from the people who are actually doing that work, right? So Alex Suchar, who's our lead research scientist, and the rest of the team. We do have a more technical discussion planned, and maybe Megan can remind us of the dates of that. And we're happy to host discussions one-on-one. There are a lot of opportunities within the model for consideration of the probabilities, for generating these different scenarios, and then using a variety of tools to evaluate what might happen next. So I'm reluctant to give an overall characterization to say, yeah, it's a stochastic model. There's pieces of it that are stochastic, there's pieces of it that are mechanistic. I think your best answer is going to come from our full technical team. Alex, I don't know if there's anything that you want to add to that.
I guess I would say that broadly we started by looking at traffic levels for 2018. That was the initial AIS data that we cleaned and used to generate the algorithms. So what Brian showed was an illustration of how a single vessel populates and transits through the system. But the reality is that there'd be all sorts of activity happening concurrently, and we would be able to see density and look at interactions. And basically, vessels will populate into the system based on sort of times and dates that we saw similar vessels populate in a year of data. So we try to spread that out over the course of the year. So you don't just say there's 1,000 container ships a year and they all appear January 10th. That wouldn't really help us out. So we're thinking of this kind of in model years and trying to normalize the traffic levels to that. But for a more technical explanation of how that's coded, I'd have to refer to the rest of the team, but we can certainly get back to you on that.
Okay, that's great. And the second part of the question was predictive capabilities. I mean, you're looking at past and recent past. 2018, I guess, is one of your focal years right now by the sounds of it. But we've seen in some regions in the Salish Sea, we've definitely seen some pretty steady increases in vessel traffic, and we've got a bunch of port developments happening, and we're probably going to see even more increases in these vessels. Is there going to be a predictive capability as well in your modeling? Are you going to try to prognosticate a little bit? That's the right way of using that term. I'm not even sure. Are you going to try to predict? A few years in advance, there's definitely some trends in some areas in the Salish Sea that are consistent over the last 5 years or so.
Right. Yeah, and I'm glad we're recording because I want to go on record and say we are not going to predict oil spills.
Okay.
Right. So, we are going to try to provide insight about risk. And one of the things that we are required to do is answer questions and provide information about potential interventions, right? Which is another reason why we felt that we had to include a simulation portion of the model. So the legislature wants to know, ERTVs, good idea, yes or no? Tug escorts for articulated tug barges in Rosario Strait, in Harrow Strait and Boundary Pass. Should we do that or should we not do that? So we've got to be able to test these interventions, right? So we need to run scenarios, with the intervention, without the intervention, and then have a way to compare the two outcomes so we can provide some information about that. Applying potential growth in future traffic is a capability that we intend to have within the model. How much we can do that in the initial build and how much we can talk about that in these first two analysis projects is still a work in progress. We do know that there are, certainly some areas of keen interest. And the most obvious example is the Trans Mountain pipeline expansion, the additional tankers, and the escort tugs that will come along with those. So, we will be saying things about that in our analysis, and we're working on, how to represent that within the model and with the analysis.
Brian, I wanted to ask a question about the potential impacts if you're looking at the traffic and various interactions. ClearSea's developed a sensitivity mapping project for the Pacific coast of Canada, and that shows the sensitivity to oil spills of various areas of the coast based on their biological, physical, or socioeconomic receptors. And I'm wondering if there'd be any interest in that work for the Puget Sound part of the Salish Sea.
Sure.
As a complement to your work.
Right. There is definite interest in that kind of work and in that kind of look, and we hear that in every interaction that we have with tribes and stakeholders. Our ability to do that in a meaningful way is not something that we can commit to for certainly for these first two analysis projects. We will have risk metrics, and so we talk about the potential volume of oil spilled in a scenario in the model as a risk metric. Where we have some concerns is about the strength of applying that to like a fate and effects model, and then using that to say something about the potential consequences to the environment. So that piece of it, we hear that all the time, and we may hear that again in this discussion today. And we want to get to a place where we are saying meaningful things about the consequence, and that'll continue to be a work in progress.
Thank you. So I'm seeing a question in the chat from Lovell Pratt, Friends of the San Juans, and the question I think is for both Brian and Adrian. Could this model or the Canadian model be utilized to evaluate vessel traffic carrying capacity in the Salish Sea? So how many ships can the area sustain and still maintain its biodiversity?
I can say something about that first, and then maybe see if Adrian wants to add in. I think that is so what our model is designed to do is to provide information about oil spill risks, right? So that is one component of potential impacts to the Salish Sea, the Strait of Juan de Fuca, and from our perspective, the waters of Washington State, right? That's what we're directed to be able to model. But our model is specific to oil spill risks. So I don't think that gets at a broader consideration of like cumulative impacts or all of the other factors that would go into that kind of consideration.
Yeah, I would say the same for our model. We're just trying to predict the number of expected accidents, so not going into that much detail. So our model, I guess, is relatively simple in that manner. Thanks.
Are there any other questions for any of the speakers today? If anything has come up as a result of the other presentations that you'd want to go back to Tessa or Adrian, or something that you'd want to ask Brian, now is a good time. We've got a few more minutes before we wrap up. Brian, could you mention a little bit more about the two analyses that you mentioned? What are the goals of those?
Sure. So, the legislative direction. So I flashed that on the screen earlier. So for the ERTV analysis, the question is, would an ERTV serving Harrow Strait, Boundary Pass, and Rosario Strait reduce oil spill risk? And for the tug escort analysis, the question is, how would tug escorts affect oil spill risks for or when applied to relatively small tank vessels? So oil tankers less than 40,000 deadweight tons, articulated tug barges greater than 5,000 deadweight tons, and towed oil barges greater than 5,000 deadweight tons. And that is all the legislature provided us for direction. So, the rest of these details we're developing and filling in with the team, and then through our interactions with tribes and stakeholders. Both of those reports are due to the legislature on September 1, 2023. The tug escort analysis feeds into a rulemaking process, and that rulemaking will be led by the Washington Board of Pilotage Commissioners, because that's who has the authority for tug escort requirements in the state of Washington. So that work will immediately, inform that process. And the direction to Washington BPC is to have rules in place for tug escorts for those classes of tank vessels by December 31 of 2025. That does not mean that tug escorts will be required by rule for all of those types of tank vessels in, all of the waters, all the Washington waters of Puget Sound. It just means that the rulemaking process has to, consider and develop rules for tug escorts for those classes of tank vessels where it makes sense to do so. And the analysis that we're doing is one component of that rulemaking. There are other components that we are not doing within the ecology spills program, such as a consideration of underwater noise and how that might change if you did require all of these tug escorts, and also a consideration of potential impacts to tribal, usual, and accustomed fishing grounds.
Lots of important stuff coming up. Thank you, Brian. So I'm not seeing any other questions at the moment. So I actually have a question to ask of the group, and thinking about future such meetings. We've scheduled meetings for June 2nd and October 6th at the same time period, thinking to hold those thoughts in people's calendars to talk about other aspects that come up that are relevant or of interest. And so to that end, I'm going to drop into the chat question and wondering if you can, since the poll function is not working for me today, if you can let me know what you are most interested in as a member of this working group, or you see as the most important role of the working group. One option is to share current research related to shipping risk in the Salish Sea, discuss different approaches to mitigating shipping risk in the Salish Sea, connect with others working on the Salish Sea in those topics, connect with others working in broader Salish Sea issues, or other. So if any of those kind of speak to you, please let me know through the chat, and that will help me get a sense of what the areas of interest are for future such sessions. And while you're doing that, as Brian mentioned, we're thinking to have another follow-on session to continue the discussion, but at a more in-depth level of conversation, really digging into how these models are being put together and getting into algorithms and technical aspects. So if anybody is interested in that level of detail, we're going to pick this conversation up again next week on March 9th, again, 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. And that's for anybody who really wants to learn more about how these models are put together and share their expertise on how such risk models are developed. So if there's any questions or thoughts or suggestions for future topics that we could talk about in June, please feel free to put that in the chat or send me an email afterwards. I'll put my email address into the chat to make sure everybody has that. And we also have, we'll be sharing the recordings and the presentations with everybody. So I will be posting those on our website, which is hosted through the ClearSeas research pages. And I'll be sending a note out to everybody who registered to let them know when those are up so you can access them. And yeah, if there's any last thoughts or comments that anybody would like to share on this topic, please feel free to unmute yourself and go ahead and add anything you'd like to the conversation today. All right, well, thank you all so much for joining us and participating in a really, really interesting discussion today. Thanks to our presenters and thanks to everyone who hung out here with us and participated in the conversation, and look forward to continuing this in the future. Thanks so much for taking part.
Thanks very much.